On today's episode of the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, the top three in the rotation is set, but what about the rest of it? Is Brandon Pfaadt and the internal options good enough to fill out this D-backs rotation, or does Mike Hazen need to go out there and sign another starting pitcher?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I'm the host of this wonderful podcast, of course, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com to see all of my latest work. On today's podcast, we'll be talking more about the offseason. Do the D-backs need to go out there and sign another starter? Is Brandon Pfaadt and Tommy Henry and the rest of the options good enough to fill out this D-backs rotation? We'll get into all that on today's podcast. But I first want to say thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends, tell them to subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube or wherever you stream podcasts. But now let's get into the podcast and actually talk about this D-backs rotation and what they should do with it the rest of this offseason, because there has been discussions with Mike Hazen about how he might not be done adding to the rotation this offseason. He's still potentially looking around the free agent market, the trade market. The D-backs might be bringing in another veteran to round out this rotation, probably in that number 5 spot. But I first want to talk about the number 4 spot, and if Brandon Pfaadt is really ready to lock down that number 4 spot in the rotation in 2024, because we need to know which Brandon Pfaadt we're going to be getting next season. Will he be the regular season Brandon Pfaadt, who showed a lot of struggles and wasn't the dude we thought we were going to get in the postseason? Will we get postseason Pfaadt? The dude looked like a frontline starter in the playoffs. Will we get that guy as our number 4? Or will he land somewhere in between? Because Pfaadt entering 2024, you can make the argument he's the biggest swing player for the D-backs next season. And you could make the argument he was the biggest swing player for the D-backs entering the postseason, because we saw when we got great Brandon Pfaadt, how much of a difference it made in that D-backs rotation that just didn't feel strong after Gallen and Kelly. But Pfaadt was able to step up to the plate, and he was a massive player for the D-backs in the postseason and a massive swing player for the D-backs in the postseason. What he did against LA, the Dodgers, and the Philadelphia Phillies was absolutely incredible. You can't understate how important he was after the wild card round. The D-backs desperately needed it. And in the divisional series, in the championship series, 14 innings pitched, 2 earned runs against some of the best offenses in Major League Baseball. Pfaadt was absolutely electric in the postseason, and we needed it. We needed every level, every level that he showed in the postseason. I didn't know where I was going with that phrase. But despite him being so incredible in the postseason, the reason we felt like it was such an incredible turn for him once we got to the playoffs is because of what we saw in the regular season, which was a lot of struggles from a Brandon Pfaadt. His command wasn't exactly there in the regular season, and his pitches seemed very flat. From his scouting report in the minor leagues, Brandon Pfaadt, as he came up through the system, we were all expecting a major strikeout artist. He was a 2-pitch fastball kind of a guy. Fastball, he had the 4-seam fastball. He had the 2-seam fastball. He had stuff that he could work off his hard throwing stuff. Like, we thought Brandon Pfaadt was maybe going to be a more ready prospect than what we first saw in the early part of the regular season, because he struggled a lot. And when you talk about his lack of command, it wasn't like when he missed his target, it led to walks. When Brandon Pfaadt missed his target, it led to hits, and it led to moon shots over the fence. In the regular season, he gave up 22 home runs over just 96 innings pitched for a 5.72 ERA. The man gave up so many home runs. How many multi-home run games did we see from Brandon Pfaadt? A lot. He had a lot of games where he gave up 2 or 3 home runs, and you just knew. Whenever Brandon Pfaadt gave up 1 home run, you knew a second one was coming, because he liked to give up home runs in bunches. You looked at his whip from the regular season. This was a guy who honestly didn't walk a lot in the regular season, but he still had a 1.4 whip because he just gave up so many hits, double-digit hits per 9 innings, just a ton of contact allowed. But in the postseason, all that flipped for him. Once he got to the postseason, his whip dropped below 1.1, with his strikeouts per 9 going to double digits, and he stopped giving up the long ball. That's what we didn't see from him in the regular season. He gave up a lot of home runs, and he just didn't strike out a ton of dudes. But in the postseason, he stopped giving up hits. He wasn't walking guys, and he started striking out people at a much higher level, and he stopped giving up the long ball too, which was also a big issue. So he basically fixed all his issues once he got to the postseason. And so that makes me ask, did Brandon Pfaadt, when he got to the playoffs, did he figure it out? Is this the Brandon Pfaadt we're going to see moving forward? Or will he turn into a pumpkin again once the regular season starts? It's going to be such a huge question for Brandon Pfaadt to answer in 2024, because if we get the guy that we saw in the postseason, that's a major game changer for the D-backs if that is the guy that's your number 4 starter in the rotation. And as much postseason Pfaadt, as much fun as postseason Pfaadt was, I just don't know how sustainable that success over the course of a full season is. I mean, I just don't know if he's that level of pitcher yet. I don't know if he could do what he did in the postseason over the course of 30 plus starts. If he can, the D-backs are going to win 100 games next season. But if he can't, I also think that's okay. I do think Pfaadt will not look like the guy that we saw in the regular season last year. Like, I'm not sure he's going to look like postseason Pfaadt in 2024, but I don't think he will be regular season 2023 Pfaadt either. I think Pfaadt will probably look like a number 4 starter. I think he'll probably sit in that 3.8 to like 4.1 ERA range, where he will have a handful of starts. He'll have 6, 7, 8 starts where he looks absolutely awesome. 6+ innings pitched, 10+ strikeouts, and probably 2 earned runs or less. But he will also probably have 2, 3, 4 starts where he gives up 2, maybe 3 home runs. Like, I still think he'll probably give up a couple of long balls next year. That still might be a problem that he has to deal with. But I think he'll take the good with the bad, because I think over the course of a full season, Brandon Pfaadt will be steady enough to be considered a number 4 starter in a playoff rotation. I think he will eat a ton of innings. I think he will have a good amount of strikeouts, but I also think he will give up the long ball a tad as well. I think Brandon Pfaadt could kind of be Robbie Ray-ish, but the good Robbie Ray, without so many walks, kind of like the early part of Robbie Ray's career, where he just turned into, before he turned into this massive 3 true outcome player, where all he did was give up home runs, walks, and strikeouts. I think Pfaadt will do 2 of those 3 true outcomes. I think he'll strike out a ton. I do think he'll still give up some long balls, but I don't think he will walk a lot of dudes, which I do think is a feather in Pfaadt's cap. So I'm in on Pfaadt being good, but not great next regular season. But I do think he is someone that can turn it up in the postseason just because of the mentality and his approach to the game. He is someone that I do trust in a big postseason setting. So I'm locked in to Brandon Pfaadt as the number 4 starter. I do feel good about him as the number 4 starter for the D-backs in 2024. But how about the other internal options? Do we like Tommy Henry and the rest of the guys enough to be the number 5 starter in the D-backs rotation? Well, that's what we're going to discuss in segment number 2. But if you think Brandon Pfaadt, if he turns into that postseason starter over the course of a full season next year, if you think that's going to put the D-backs over the edge in 2024 and get them back to another World Series, then why not go to FanDuel Sportsbook and place a little futures bet on the D-backs to win the World Series in 2024. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. My favorite thing to do is the same game parlay. Whenever the Lakers are playing a team 500 or below, this would have hit for you last night if you took it. Guys, I think it would have hit for you last night. I would have to check the rebounds, but I'm pretty sure it would have hit if you took this bet against the San Antonio Spurs when the Lakers played them, because I always say if the Lakers play a 500 team or worse, AD over in points, he had like 35 points. AD over in rebounds, he had double-digit rebounds. And Lakers money line, they did beat the Spurs. So take that same game parlay next time you see my Lakers playing a pretty mediocre basketball team. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Now let's talk about how we feel about the D-backs internal options for that number 5 starter, because I have to discuss with you guys, because like I said at the top of segment number 1, the D-backs still might be sniffing out the free agent market, potentially the trade market too, to add one more starter to this rotation. I think Pfaadt is a complete lock to be the number 4 next year, or at least the number 5. Maybe the D-backs add someone that's good enough to push Brandon Pfaadt back in the rotation. I don't think that will happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do sign someone that could come in and battle out for that number 5 spot in the rotation. But I don't think they do anything to compromise Brandon Pfaadt as the number 4. I think his spot in the rotation next year is solidified. It's that last spot in the rotation, the number 5, where I think it's still up in the air. And I want to discuss if the D-backs internal options are good enough to take over that number 5 spot next year, because as it currently stands, it feels like Tommy Henry will get the first crack at the rotation, which I think he should because of the D-backs internal options. I do think he has the best chance to lock down that role over the course of a full season. And then after Tommy Henry, whether it's performance or health, it looks like Ryan Nelson will be the second pitcher called on from the D-back system, followed by either Bryce Jarvis or Slade Cecconi. And who else? You never know. Maybe a little Blake Walston gets into the mix. I don't know. I think he will have a couple starts for the D-backs next season, but I don't think he will come out of spring training as the number 5 starter for the D-backs. If the D-backs don't sign anybody, Tommy Henry, Ryan Nelson, Bryce Jarvis, and Slade Cecconi are the 4 definitely battling for that number 5 spot, with Tommy Henry as the clear favorite to take that role over next year. Are those options good enough to be the D-backs number 5 starter, though? Would we be happy if one of those 4 guys won the job to round out the rotation? Personally, with the way Tommy Henry looked last year, I do think he's good enough to be the final starter in this rotation. Tommy Henry is no superstar. I don't think he has the talent or the ceiling to be a number 1 or number 2 in a rotation, maybe not even a number 3. But could he be the number 4 starter in a potential postseason rotation? I do think he could have that ceiling. I do think Tommy Henry could be a back-end rotation guy, which if you told me Tommy Henry is going to be the D-backs, number 4, number 5 starter for the next 5 to 7 years, that means he hit on his ceiling and he has probably exceeded all expectations that the D-backs had for him. Tommy Henry, I like him a lot. It's not like he has overwhelming or electric stuff. This is a guy that doesn't throw super hard, which is the reason why he doesn't strike out a ton of people. I think if you look at his strikeouts per 9 innings, it's like around 6 strikeouts per 9 innings. Like his K rate going to be super low next year. It's going to be super low throughout the majority of his career because his fastball velocity only averaged like 90.7 miles per hour this past season. Like he's not a guy that throws super hard. If you actually look at the stats against his fastball for opposing batters, they crushed Tommy Henry's fastball last year. 523 slugging, 292 average. Like when he throws that fastball, there is potential for bad things to happen. But the rest of his pitches are very effective, with his specialty being his curveball and slider. Those two pitches are basically shut down pitches for Tommy Henry. When you look at some of the opposing stats for him, the slider was like virtually unhittable last year, with the curveball being very close as well. The fact that these two pitches are so effective for him, it's the reason he doesn't give up a ton of hard contact despite giving up a lot of contact on that fastball. It just doesn't lead to moonshots. It doesn't lead to a ton of extra base hits. He gives up a lot of soft contact, despite not throwing very hard, because he's able to really work off his fastball with some really good off speed and breaking pitches. So when Tommy Henry has those curveballs and sliders working, that is when he's at his absolute best. And Tommy Henry is also someone that is very good in the high pressure situations and high leverage moments. In 2023, he only allowed a 597 OPS. So this is someone that did not shrink in the biggest moments, which is very useful. We might not need that skill for Tommy Henry once we get to the postseason, but you never know. If someone like Brandon Pfaadt or Erod goes down, maybe Tommy Henry could step up and be that dude for the D-backs in a postseason setting. If he can replicate what he did in 2023, then I think he's definitely worth being the final starter. I would actually like the way the rotation balances out if he is a starter, just because you would have righty in Gallen, Merrill Kelly, lefty in Erod, righty and Pfaadt, and then back to a lefty and Tommy Henry. I just like that mix of righty, lefty. Just nice balance in the rotation. And if Tommy Henry doesn't work out, or if he gets hurt, sounds like Ryan Nelson would be next up. But for being honest, Nelson did show something at the end of the postseason. He did show a little flash in the pan at the end of the postseason this past year. But I still wouldn't have any faith in Ryan Nelson being an effective number 5 starter. And if he ends up being the number 5 starter for whatever reason, I think at that point it's either time to look at the rest of the internal options or start looking for an upgrade, because I don't think Ryan Nelson is good enough to be a starter in the rotation. I think he's better as a long reliever, or a guy that could just come in for one inning and throw as hard as he can. I would actually much rather skip Ryan Nelson's opportunity and go to a Slay Cecconi or Bryce Jarvis, because I think both of those pitchers are better at this point than even a Ryan Nelson. Maybe it's a little bit more of a toss-up between Slade or Ryan Nelson, but I think Bryce Jarvis looked pretty good last year. And honestly, I wouldn't be mad at all if they gave Slade or Jarvis a couple of chances to be the number 5 starter in the rotation. I mean, we'll see how they look in spring training. I hope they get some opportunities in spring training, because I think both of those guys showed something in the regular season last year. Both of them mid-90s with the fastball. You look at the stat line for both of them, wasn't bad either. Jarvis probably performed better. The eye test probably looked a little bit better for Jarvis, but I wouldn't mind giving either one of them a crack in the rotation if Tommy Henry doesn't pan out. But you can't deny all the internal options for the D-backs do have some level of question marks for them. Tommy Henry is coming off season-ending injury. Ryan Nelson looked bad most of last season, and Bryce Jarvis and Slay Cecconi did have small sample sizes, so it's fair to say all 4 of those guys have major questions. So I wouldn't fault the D-backs if they thought the rotation was fine where it was at with the internal options, or if they thought they needed one more guy that was a little bit more certain to round out the rotation, or at least somebody that they could sign for spring training to help raise the level of competition for that number 5 starter. I wouldn't be mad at the D-backs at all if they took a path to either add someone or if they just stood pat with their rotation and just let the young guys play. I wouldn't be mad with either scenario. But if the D-backs did want to add another starter to this rotation via free agency, I got some options for us to discuss in segment number 3. But first, I want to talk to you guys because did you know Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube? Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, and let's wrap up the podcast by talking about some more free agent pitchers that could potentially round out the rotation for the D-backs. And we're actually going to be talking about dudes who I don't think I've ever brought up on the podcast before. We've talked a whole lot about different free agents on this podcast throughout the offseason. We've talked about we just power ranked DHs on a podcast this week. We've talked about some of the best starters on the market, some of the best left fielders on the market. Like we've done so many different free agent podcasts. We've talked about we've already done podcasts on dudes who could be back end rotation starters for this D-backs rotation. But now let's talk about some more of those back end starters who we've never discussed on the podcast before. And the first guy that I want to discuss is Frankie Montas, who, and listen, all these guys have some red flags with them. None of these options are perfect, but these are options to be the number 5 starter in the D-backs rotation. We don't need them to be superstars. Frankie Montas is not a superstar, but he does have potential to be an all-star level pitcher, and he could potentially also be a nice buy low candidate for the Arizona Diamondbacks. This is someone that's coming off a season where he only pitched 1 inning before undergoing right shoulder surgery. So he is coming off it. He is coming off an injury, which always carries inherent risk. What level is he already at right now? Is he 100% and will he be ready for opening day? All those are valid questions. But if you get Frankie Montas at his best, we've seen what kind of stuff he can do. At his best, Frankie Montas is a mid-rotation starter. At his best, he is another Eduardo Rodriguez. But can he get back to being that level? Because when he was in Oakland, Frankie Montas looked really good for the Oakland A's. But since he's been traded to New York, he really struggled with the New York Yankees. If you look at his stats every year since 2018, like they look pretty good. 2018, 3.88 ERA over 11 starts. 2019, 16 starts, 2.63 ERA. We won't look at 2020. And then 2021, first year, he makes 32 starts, 187 innings pitched, first full season as a starter, 3.37 ERA, finishes 6th in Cy Young voting, double-digit strikeouts per 9. That was in 2021. That's when he's fully healthy, can pitch over the course of a full season. We know the ceiling. Frankie Montas is good enough to be a guy that's top 6 in Cy Young voting, a guy that can look like an all-star mid-rotation pitcher. Frankie Montas does have upside. Even his final season in Oakland, 2022, before he got traded, in 19 starts, a 3.1 ERA and over 100 innings pitched. But when he got traded to the Yankees that same season, 39 innings pitched, a 6.35 ERA, and then who knows how it would have gone this past season with New York. Is he a guy that struggles in, a more pressurized winning environment? I won't look at what he did with the Yankees and really take anything from it. This was a guy that was so good in Oakland. This is a guy that I do think has major upside, a guy that can look like an all-star pitcher when he's right. And the D-backs don't even need an all-star pitcher, but if you could sign a Frankie Montas as your number 5 starter, potential buy low guy because of the injury, maybe you work him back into the way he used to look, and then all of a sudden, if that guy's humming for the postseason, maybe you make him your number 4 starter, and then you make Brandon Pfaadt like this flamethrower coming out the pen. We'll see. Frankie Montas was a guy that was averaging like 96 on his fastball back in 2022. So he can also throw it pretty hard sinker ball as well, split finger. Like he has a pretty deep bag. So I do like Frankie Montas as an option. There are some question marks there considering he's coming off a season-ending injury, but I like the upside a lot and I wouldn't mind bringing him in the building. Then the final guy that I want to discuss, not the sexiest name, because he's a little bit older, but I do think he's still very effective, a lot of experience on his belt. Hyun-Jin Ryu. This is someone that back with the LA Dodgers was an elite pitcher, finished top 3 in Cy Young voting in 2019 and 2020, but since signing with Toronto, hasn't looked like the same guy, and he was coming off Tommy John surgery, but in the second half of 2023, did look good with the Blue Jays. 11 starts in the final couple months for a 3.46 ERA. Maybe he doesn't have the upside of even like a Frankie Montas, but at his best, Hyun-Jin Ryu has shown to be a very good pitcher in his career, and I don't know if he can get back to being. I don't think he's ever going to get back to being that dude that finishes top 3 in Cy Young voting. But if he could be like a 3, if he can be a 3.5 ERA over the course of a full season, that would help out this D-backs team a lot. Hopefully his arm is strong enough at age 37 to make 30 starts. I don't know if that's possible, but maybe he's someone where it's like you bring him in. Maybe he's more of a second half pitcher for you. You want to use Tommy Henry in the first half. You want to use Hyun-Jin Ryu for the second half of the season, or maybe you do the reverse. I don't know, but I do think he's an interesting candidate for the D-backs to sign as your number 5 starter, someone with a ton of postseason experience, someone that knows the LA Dodgers in and out. Yes, he's a little bit older, but I do still think he has a little bit of juice left in the tank. Maybe this is a situation where you just like, let me go with the young guy, Tommy Henry, over the old dog and Hyun-Jin Ryu. But sometimes the old dog can still pull out a few new tricks out of their sleeve. So I wouldn't be mad at all if the D-backs went a little bit older and signed a Hyun-Jin Ryu type to fill out this rotation. Now that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back next week for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. Remember, we're in off-season mode, so only 3 podcasts a week. I think I'm going to continue to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so be on the lookout for the pods. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.